Reynolds's stance wasn't right. Blackwood saw the slight sway in his posture, the forced laugh that didn't reach his eyes. His right hand kept clenching and unclenching, a subtle sign of someone working themselves up to do something reckless. This was different from the usual crowd provocations. There was a calculated edge to Reynolds's actions, a deliberate escalation that sent a warning signal to Blackwood's trained instincts. The atmosphere had thickened with tension, the crowd's noise almost drowned out by the mounting unease, as the sun began to shift in the sky, casting long shadows across the palace grounds. A cool breeze whispered through the air. The distant chimes of Big Ben rang out. Marking the hour, 3 p.m. Blackwood had been standing at his post since dawn, the muscles in his legs and back trained to withstand fatigue and remain still. He'd perfected this discipline through countless ceremonies, and now it served him both as armor and weapon. "Maybe he's broken," Reynolds mocked loudly, stepping forward and positioning himself directly in front of Blackwood. His expensive loafers scuffed against the pavement, a sharp sound in the quiet afternoon. "Hey, robot, anyone home?" He waved his hand in front of Blackwood's face, so close that the guard could smell the heavy scotch on his breath. If Blackwood had to guess, the man had consumed at least a bottle of Mullen 25. Not that it made the disrespect any more tolerable. The crowd had grown larger now, a mix of curious tourists and those beginning to feel uncomfortable. Some had stopped filming, their phones lowered in discomfort, their eyes diverted. A young couple quickly ushered their children away, exchanging disapproving glances over their shoulders. Yet, Reynolds's friends were in a frenzy of excitement, oblivious to the growing tension. "This is going viral for sure," one of them called out, adjusting the angle of his camera for a better shot. His Rolex gleamed as he moved, catching the sunlight with each shift. "Do the thing we talked about, Kev," one of them urged, their excitement now tinged with desperation. It was as if they were trying too hard to believe they were having fun, to convince themselves the scene was a moment worth celebrating. A young girl, no older than 7 or 8, tugged at her mother's sleeve, her ice cream cone melting forgotten in her hand as she watched the unfolding drama with wide-eyed concern. "Mommy, why is that man being so mean?" The innocent question pierced the tension in the air, causing several onlookers to shift uncomfortably, their discomfort palpable. A father, perhaps sensing the lesson unfolding before him, pulled his son closer, whispering what appeared to be a quiet lesson about respect. But Reynolds, in his drunken arrogance, either didn't hear or didn't care. His smirk widened as he turned to the growing crowd, playing to their curiosity as though he were the star of a show. The more they watched, the more he escalated. Reynolds either failed to notice or chose to ignore the impact of his actions, too far gone in his performance to recognize the growing discomfort around him. Instead, he turned to his captivated audience, arms spread wide like a showman, his polo shirt now damp with sweat despite its pristine brand name, clinging to his frame as he swayed slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice now laced with a theatrical flair, "I think it's time we found out if these guards are actually human." The words felt rehearsed, as though he'd planned this moment for some time, but beneath the bravado was something darker, something ugly, a desperate need to prove himself, to assert dominance over the very symbol of authority and discipline standing before him. Blackwood remained unflinching, unimpressed by the display. It was the same tone Reynolds used in board meetings when belittling junior executives, in restaurants when sending back perfectly good wine, and in life, when trying to fill the void that his wealth couldn't touch. Blackwood's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. In Afghanistan, he had learned to read people, to sense when the temperature of a situation was about to rise past the point of no return. That same instinct screamed at him now. He could feel the weight of his ceremonial rifle, the press of his bearskin cap, the eyes of centuries of tradition watching through him, but his training held firm. He remained motionless, eyes fixed on a distant point, even as Reynolds moved closer. Even as the air around them grew thick with tension. In his peripheral vision, Blackwood saw tourists begin to back away, forming a loose circle around the unfolding scene. What was once a group of eager spectators had now become a tense audience, sensing the reckoning that was about to unfold. What happened next would test not just Blackwood's military training, but the very essence of what it meant to wear the uniform of the Queen's Guard. Reynolds, his expensive polo shirt now soaked through with sweat from the afternoon heat, circled Blackwood like a predator circling its prey. But in his alcohol-fueled haze, he failed to recognize one crucial detail: he wasn't the hunter here. 8 years of military service had made Blackwood acutely aware of every movement, every subtle shift in the air around him. He could feel the gathering storm of tension, the weight of history pressing down on him as Reynolds taunted and pushed forward. "You know what I think?" Reynolds slurred, his words now tinged with drunken bravado. "I think these guys are just scared. Scared to move, scared to speak, scared to be real." He spoke to the crowd, a growing chorus of snickers from his friends and uneasy glances from others. "They hide behind tradition because they're too weak to face reality." Blackwood's mind flashed briefly to a morning in Helmand Province, where he had held his position under heavy fire for 3 hours to protect a wounded colleague. Weak was not a word that featured in his vocabulary. But Reynolds, with his privileged background and drunken words, seemed to think he could provoke him to anger. And for the first time, Blackwood's patience wavered. Just for a moment, Reynolds leaned in closer, his designer sunglasses now dangling loosely from his collar. "What do they even do here, anyway? Stand around like statues while the world laughs at them?" He turned to his friends, who continued filming, their discomfort becoming increasingly evident. Even they seemed to sense that a line was about to be crossed. An elderly man, a veteran judging by the RAF pin glinting in the sunlight on his chest, stepped forward from the crowd. "Son, that's enough," he said firmly. "You've had your fun." But Reynolds, fueled by expensive scotch, wounded pride, and the eyes of the crowd upon him, was beyond hearing reason. The storm he had created was nearing its peak. "You want to know what I think of your precious?" Reynolds sneered, but before he could finish, Blackwood's training kicked into high gear. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Reynolds's face twisted into a grotesque mix of contempt and an urgent, almost desperate need for attention. Time seemed to slow as he gathered the saliva in his mouth. The crowd around them completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Later, dozens of videos would capture this moment from every conceivable angle, but none could truly capture the sudden, horrified silence that fell over the crowd. The spittle landed on Blackwood's cheek, just below his right eye. For a fraction of a second, even the birds seemed to stop singing. The collective gasp from the crowd filled the air, creating a vacuum of sound, as if all of London held its breath. Reynolds stood there, a triumphant smirk playing across his face, clearly expecting something, anything, a reaction, a breakdown, a victory. What he got instead was something far more terrifying. Blackwood didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. The saliva slid down his cheek like a tear, but his face remained as immovable as the palace walls behind him. In that moment, the contrast between the two men could not have been starker, one swaying slightly from drink and misplaced confidence, the other standing as solid and unmoving as an oak, dignity intact despite the ultimate insult. The silence hung in the air for what felt like an eternity. The crowd, still holding their breath, could only watch as Blackwood, unshaken, proved the depth of his restraint. Finally, the silence was broken by the sound of running feet. Palace security had finally noticed the disturbance, and uniformed officers were pushing through the crowd. But it wasn't just their footsteps that commanded attention, it was the unmistakable rhythm of the guard captain's march, and the approaching patrol that now carried real weight. Reynolds, suddenly aware of the consequences of his actions, took a stumbling step back. His friends lowered their phones, the reality of what they had just captured sinking in. One of them muttered, "Kev, man, what did you do?" The crowd had now fully encircled the two men. No one wanted to stand too close to either of them. But no one left either. Parents pulled their children back, unsure of what to make of the unfolding scene, but no one dared to walk away. The air was thick with anticipation. They all sensed that history was about to be made, but not in the way Reynolds had intended. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit like and share it. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring videos. Thanks again and see you in the next one.